Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the launch of Robots, Ethics and the Future of Jobs by Father Seán McDonagh. My name is Cecilia West, and I'm the director here at Messenger Publications. On behalf of the author and all at Messenger, I'd like to welcome you all from wherever in the world you're joining us. We've a real treat in store for you to set the mood for the evening. Seán's very talented nieces, the McDonagh sisters, will play for us. Alva McDonagh is a cello soloist and composer who teaches at the Royal Irish Academy of Music, and her sister, Dr. Orla McDonagh, is head of the TU Dublin Conservatoire and is a renowned concert pianist. I'm delighted to introduce the McDonagh sisters playing Alva McDonagh's composition, Fandango for cello and piano. What a wonderful piece of music and so beautifully played. A few quick thank yous before we start. Thank you firstly to Seán for entrusting his book to Messenger. I first heard of Seán back in the mid-80s when he published his first book, To Care for the Earth, which was a groundbreaking book at the time. So I was very delighted when Seán approached Messenger last year with his new book. The subject matter had us all fascinated right from the start, and we're absolutely honoured to publish this important book. I'd also like to thank Carlin Lillington for her very thoughtful foreword to the book. Thanks too to my colleagues at Messenger for their work in getting the book from manuscript into the hands of the readers. A couple of special mentions: our editors, Kate Kiernan and Fiona Biggs, our designer, Paula Nolan, who designed both the book and the very striking cover. And a special thanks to Caroline Henry, who has worked so hard on publicising the book and on organising the launch this evening. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lorna Gold. Lorna was for many years head of policy and advocacy with Trócaire, leading a number of high-profile research and advocacy projects on climate justice and sustainable development. Now, as well as being Laudato Si project coordinator with Trócaire, Lorna works part-time in Maynooth University and also as an independent consultant on climate justice. She's currently Director of Movement Building for Faith Invest, Acting Chair for the Global Catholic Climate Movement, and a member of the recently established Vatican Commission on the Post-COVID World. Dr. Lorna Gold.
Thanks very much, Cecilia. In case people wonder how I make time for all of those things at the same time, some of them are actually, I finished in Trócaire just last year before the COVID outbreak. It's a huge honour for me to be here tonight to help to launch Seán's new book. I have to say, my first reaction when I heard that Seán was writing a book about robots was really, what on earth has robots to do with ecology and biodiversity? Is that not a bit of a leap in what Seán normally writes about? And I was intrigued to know how he was going to connect Catholic social teaching, Laudato Si, and robots. This reaction of mine, I think, reflected my total ignorance of AI and robots. My image of robots, I have to confess, dates back to when I was growing up. You had the good robots like R2-D2 and C3PO, and then you had the baddies who were the Terminator and the Daleks. So robots were something for me that was something of science fiction, something far away in a fantasy world. And I have to say that until I read Seán's book in the past few weeks, I was blissfully ignorant of how things have changed since those sci-fi days. So you can imagine my surprise when Seán asked me to speak at his launch. I'm the last person you should ask, really, to speak about robots. As ever, I think Seán's got a bit of method in his madness. He obviously wanted me to speak, not because I know anything about robots, but perhaps because maybe reading this book, I might learn something. And I have to say that I've learned an awful lot. Seán knows, perhaps more than, or like most of us, that many of us are extremely busy these days, and we find it hard to take time to read a book. So the first thing I have to say to Seán is a huge thank you for putting me on the spot and making me read a book about robots. This is a truly wonderful and really important book. And huge congratulations to you on getting it out. I can only imagine how much work and research has gone into this book and how difficult it must have been to complete it within the context of the pandemic. But I can say that this book is a real gift to all of us. So the book is eminently accessible, even for people like me who knew very little about this area. In fact, I would say that it's designed for people like me who might be interested generally in social issues, social justice, ecology, and perhaps need a bit of an update, a deeper understanding of some of these bigger trends that are happening in our world today. I found it a real treasure trove of little known facts. And I found it interesting both as a mother bringing up young children in the world today, and also as a citizen and an academic interested in these kinds of issues. The book's written in a very accessible style. Seán, if you've read any of his other books, writes in a very distinctive, engaging way, bringing you right into the heart of the message, peppering the debate with his own interesting anecdotes and also really practical examples of what this means for real life. The book I found to be very clearly set out. It's the kind of book you could read in one go, or do as I did and dip in and out of it, trying to focus in on different topics because it's written in a very topical way. The book really brings home the fact that AI and robotics is not sci-fi anymore. This is something that's here and now. We're surrounded by it, and it's already influencing every part of our lives. When you read Seán's book, you start to see just how far down this road we are and just how much power we've ceded to AI. And what is really striking is the breathtaking speed at which all this has happened. As I started to read this book, I realised immediately the connection between this and Laudato Si and the broader ecology movement. What Seán is actually writing about here goes to the very heart of what is happening to our world. I'd like to quote from Laudato Si just to illustrate this. It's what Pope Francis describes as the problem of an undifferentiated, one-dimensional technocratic paradigm. Now that's a bit of a mouthful. Pope Francis says, it can be said that many of the problems of today's world stem from the tendency, at times unconscious, to make the method and aims of science and technology an epistemological paradigm which shapes the lives of individuals and the workings of society. The problem we have today is that this whole paradigm is completely unseen. And this concept of a technocratic paradigm is not an easy one to get your head around, mainly because it's so ingrained in our culture, we take it as a given and as common sense. To quote Pope Francis again, the effects of imposing this model on reality as a whole, human and social, are seen in the deterioration of the environment. But this is just one sign of a reductionism which affects every aspect of human and social life. We have to accept that technological products are not neutral, for they create a framework which ends up conditioning lifestyles and shaping social possibilities along the lines dictated by the interests of certain powerful groups. Decisions which may seem purely instrumental are in reality decisions about the kind of society we want to build. In this book, Seán addresses one of the implications, the most important implications of this technocratic paradigm, the future of work, and he brings it to life. It's remarkable that he does not do this so much through philosophical and theological debates and discussions, but through a wide-ranging exploration of how this is of the most visible expressions of this paradigm and how they are already intermeshed with our daily lives. Just to mention a few that struck me. The fact that robots are already in care homes, entertaining residents and patrolling the corridors at night to ensure residents are safe. The fact that crewless jets are used already in armed conflict, pinpointing targets from up to 2.2 kilometers away and firing at them. The fact that 3D printers exist already with the ability to print cars. Not to mention the relentless rise of autonomous vehicles and the numerous personal assistants I'm sure many people on this call already have in their homes. One of the key themes that runs through this book is the question of unaccountable power. This question is not only the impact of shifting, the question is not only one of shifting patterns of work, but the very fact that such crucial decisions, such critical decisions influencing everything in our lives are being taken by a few global corporations and a few hundred people on their boards. Pope Francis, to quote him again, "Never has humanity had such power over itself, yet nothing ensures that it will be used wisely, particularly when we consider how it is currently being used. We need but think of the nuclear bombs dropped in the middle of the 20th century, or the array of technology which Nazism, communism, and other totalitarian regimes have employed to kill millions of people, to say nothing of the increasingly deadly arsenal of weapons available for modern warfare. In whose hands does all this power lie, or will it eventually end up? It is extremely risky for a small part of humanity to have it." And that is exactly the question that this important book of Seán's addresses. Seán does, of course, move to say, how do we address this issue? And in particular, what it means for those who will lose their jobs as a result of the relentless rise of artificial intelligence and all kinds of robots. It's very interesting that, having explored all the ways that AI is reducing the need for certain kinds of human work, Seán ends his book with a chapter on universal basic income. Seán proposes this as one potential way in which technological transition can be managed for the many rather than the few, as there will be fewer jobs, particularly low-skilled jobs, and we need to provide people with an income in different ways. I agree wholeheartedly that this will be part of the solution. I would say that as we go further into this discussion, we also need to look at other ways of addressing accountability, such as tax justice and taxes on those large corporations. It's perhaps surprising for some that the conclusion at the end of this book, which essentially has argued the need to curb the relentless destruction of jobs by unaccountable technology. One could equally argue that we need to focus on pulling the brakes, reconfiguring how we think about technology, and challenging the assumption that this kind of progress is unstoppable. We need to reimagine a world where there is a lot less work for the masses and income is derived from elsewhere. But at the same time, we need greater effort to perhaps see and understand what is happening around us to break out of this technocratic paradigm. So finally, a huge congratulations to Seán. This is a book I would recommend to everybody. Essentially, this book could not be more timely or necessary reading for us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorna, for a very interesting talk. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, John Sweeney, who is Emeritus Professor of Geography at NUI Maynooth. John has written extensively on aspects of climatology and climate change in Ireland. He served as president of the Irish Meteorological Society, the Geographical Society of Ireland, and Antashka. He also contributed to the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. A regular contributor to print and broadcast media on matters related to climate change, science and policy, he received the inaugural award for achievements in journalism from the European Meteorological Society in 2014. Professor John Sweeney.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I'm going to try and share my screen and get going from there. Let's see if it works. Yeah, hopefully you can see that coming up shortly. Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Lorna said, how honoured I am to be asked to speak at Seán's launch. I've known Seán for many, many years now. And as Lorna was saying, this is a big departure for him, but it's a fundamental departure because it actually tells us a lot about the future. And it is, in a sense, almost a prophecy of where we're going. And as I read it, I realized a couple of things. I realized, first of all, that I'm one of the posse that doesn't really think about what I'm doing when it comes to technology a lot of the time. So I learned quite a lot from the text, and I just wanted to start with giving you a few snippets that maybe you know, maybe you don't know. And the first is that we don't have any secrets anymore. Every search you've ever made, every YouTube video you've ever watched has been recorded. All your emails, all your contacts, and because of our phones and our laptops, every place you've been is now known as well. And as Lorna was saying, your assistant, your Google Assistant in your house, for example, doesn't just respond when you speak. It is listening for you to speak at the same time. And of course, maybe you've had the experience I've had of looking for something on the web and then for the next month, you get these constant advertisements popping up exactly for what you've been looking for. And that comes about because every time you see an advertisement, whether you click on it or not, it's being recorded. And perhaps most insidiously in some ways is the rise of facial recognition, something that has benefits. You maybe use it when you come through the airport for your passport, but also something which can be used increasingly to track your racial origins, for example. Whether you're a Uyghur in China, whether you're in some other ethnic minority, these are the kind of uses which increasingly facial recognition can be done. It has its advantages, as we know as well. But as I say, I'm one of these people that stumble into things without thinking. And so I began to look for a few minutes at the kind of terms and conditions that we all tick blindly without even reading for any of the websites, for any of the apps that we download. And there are a few rather surprising things come out when you look at those. And I wanted to share a few with you. Just the first one there, the Amazon one, it's sometimes called the zombie apocalypse clause. And if you actually look at the terms and conditions, you'll see that the restrictions and so on will not apply for viral infections transmitted via bites or contact with bodily fluids that causes human corpses to reanimate and seek to consume living human flesh, blood, brain, or nerve tissue, and is likely to result in the fall of organized civilization. Lots of people tick that without even reading it. The one below, we tend to use iTunes for our downloads, for our music and maybe our videos. But are you aware that in doing that, you're agreeing that you won't use them for the production or manufacture of nuclear missiles, for example? We tick those without blindly reading them as well. And I like the third one here, the Game Station one, which grants a non-transferable option to claim for now and forevermore your immortal soul. Should we wish to exercise this option, you agree to surrender your immortal soul and any claim you have on it within 5 days. And again, people ticked on that. Maybe you're renting a house. You should look at your rental agreement, because in your rental agreement, for all we know, and this is another one, the lessor shall provide a birthday cake to the lessee in the weekend closest to their birthdays. Vanilla cake is not acceptable. And people take that and agree to it. But my favorite one is the one at the bottom, which was actually put out to try and deter people from using public Wi-Fi unwisely in London about 5 years ago. And the condition was that it would be provided only if the recipient agreed to assign their firstborn child to us for the duration of eternity. Now, lots of people tick that. You'd be surprised. A lot of people ticked it, but it shows the way in which we make a compact with technology. We make a contract with technology because there are benefits to us, and we quietly just ignore some of the things which go along with it. We don't actually drill down into some of the contract details, which are not as extreme as this in most cases, but nevertheless, they have their particular uses. Now, Seán's book throws up a lot of snippets, as Lorna was saying. I mean, some of them quite alarming. And, you know, one of the ones that I picked out here was that Irish workers face a 50% chance that their jobs will be automated in little more than a decade. And that's coming from the highest level of government. And those workers will be across the spectrum. They won't be solely manual workers. They will be mainly service occupations that will go first. 15 million jobs in the UK will be lost through automation. And the reason for those little tick the box terms and conditions, of course, is that there's an agenda. The agenda is to get your data, and to get your data, especially for advertising. And we've seen some of the big companies begun to dominate the advertising market to the extent that now we're facing crises in print and broadcast media. If Google and Facebook account for 60% of global advertising, you can see the way it's going to squeeze out many other vehicles. So there is a certain piece of work there that we have to be very conscious of. Now, a few of the chapters in Seán's book are really quite telling. Artificial intelligence, the importance, the rise of the algorithm. We've seen in Ireland, of course, last year, when algorithms go wrong, the kind of social consequences it has. But they're being used to track our movements, of course, at the moment in the pandemic. They're being used with facial recognition at major airports. And once you have your face and your credit card in the company, you don't actually need to have a cash out desk or a cashier. Rather, one of the things I did find surprising was that half the parents in Britain today ask Alexa or YouTube to read bedtime stories to their children. So we're moving increasingly towards that kind of lifestyle. Lorna talked about 3D printing, and Seán has a very influential section on that. We haven't seen it mushroom yet. We've only got about 500,000 3D printers in 2016, but last year we had 6.7 million. And you can see the way that not just the numbers, but the scale is going up, and the scale and the ability to print things on site. And think what that's going to do to developing countries. Think what it's going to do to labor-intensive industries. Think what it's going to do to trade. If you can print your bicycle on the country, in the country concerned, if you can print the wings of your aircraft, for example, or parts of a ship or car. So you're going to see dramatic changes, and we see that already in the Adidas case there, where the printing will enable 160 people to be employed in Germany, but will throw out of work 1,000 in one single Asian factory doing the manufacturing. Seán talks about robots and drones quite cogently as well, and we don't need to dwell on that. We see the way they are changing how we work, how we bank, how we shop, how we get educated, how we farm, and so on. And Lorna mentioned the increasingly perhaps insidious use of robots as substitutes for human companionship. They have their benefits, as Seán mentions, for surgery, for diagnosis, but also, of course, they have their disadvantages, and we've seen them to lethal effect during wartime. So finally then, all of this is giving us a warning, and Seán is telling us that we're on a path and we're deeply down the road, as Lorna was saying, on that path, that we maybe should think a little more about what kind of guidance we need on that. And the central message, I think, of Seán's book is that we shouldn't stumble into the future with these very powerful technologies without having some kind of a moral compass, without some kind of an ethics guide, if you like, to give us some control and some guidance as to where we're going. So the main conclusions here, I think, are worth looking at in the text. Corporate responsibility must be enforced to achieve social justice. Seán does mention the option of universal basic income, a model worth looking at, one which, if you think about it, will result in fundamental changes in society, and one which will be vehemently opposed by vested interest groups. We have to think about the way we interact with with robots, because we see even today the way we interact with our phones, the way teenagers interact with each other, the loss of human contact is something we have to be very conscious of. And of course, the loss of community, which all of this entails, is something which is very important for Irish people who have this strong tradition of social bonding, both here and abroad. And the erosion of social capital through those kinds of technological advances, the destruction of interpersonal relations, does ultimately lead to environmental destruction and human rights losses. So we have to be very careful about the road we're traveling on. When you take a large number of the population out of employment, you create preconditions for great unrest. And we saw, for example, last week, how people react violently when the economy is closed off to them. Imagine 40 or 50% of the population unemployed in the future, the kind of consequences that would arise from that. So again, Seán finishes the text by saying the churches, and indeed all of the churches, need to start taking a lead in this area taking the, I suppose, initiative to provide that moral compass, to provide those ethical guidelines, to emphasize, as has been traditional, the importance of individual self-worth, the importance of work. And the fourth industrial revolution is coming fast on us. And this, I think, is the overwhelming message I got from reading this really good book. The fourth industrial revolution will change our way of life just as much as all the other revolutions did before them. So we do need to pay cognizance, I think, to where we're going, how we're going, and whether or not we are establishing a balanced relationship with technology, and especially with the firms that run it. And that's the guidance of this book. So I would really recommend you have a look at this book. It's short, it's excellent. It's only a couple of 100 pages at the most, but it contains, I think, the guidance that we need for the future. And I really would commend it to you as an excellent piece of work. And I congratulate Seán on its production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Before I go on, I'd just like to say that we will have, if we've time, some questions and answers at the end. So if you have a question for the panelists, please type it into the chat and we'll take some questions at the end. And now I'd like to introduce the man of the moment, the author, Seán McDonagh. Seán was born in Nenagh, County Tipperary. He studied for the priesthood at Dalgan Park with the Columbans, and in 1969 he was ordained as a Columban missionary and went to as a Columban, and was sent as a missionary to Mindanao in the Philippines. He worked there for 4 years before going to study linguistics and anthropology in the US. On his return to the Philippines, it was the destruction of a local forest in Taboli country which led Seán to begin what has been a lifelong devotion to ecological activism. This led to his first book, To Care for the Earth, which called for a new theology, which would give at least as much prominence to creation as to redemption. Seán argued that the grammar of this new creation theology ought to be the findings of modern science. He's gone on to write a further 7 pioneering books, as well as the book this evening. In 2006, Seán was awarded a PhD on the basis of his published works. In 2009, he gave the keynote address to the Lobby on Congress Conference on Climate Change in Washington, DC. Later that year, he was one of 2 main speakers at a week-long conference on ecology and faith at Assisi in Italy. And again in that year, Seán gave a lecture on the theology of mining in Peru, where he was awarded an honorary doctorate. In 2009, Seán was one of 260 religious leaders invited to Windsor Castle in Britain for a celebration of faiths and the environment. The Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, addressed the participants. In 2010, Seán was awarded the 8th Annual Partnership for Global Justice Award at the Church of St. Paul the Apostle in New York. In 2014 and 15, Seán was involved in the research which led to the publication of the papal encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. In 2018, Seán became president of An Taisce, which of course is a major environmental organisation in Ireland. Since then, he's continued his research and writing, leading to this present publication. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the author, Father Seán McDonagh.
Thank you very much, Seán. Thanks to, of course, John and Lorna for their presentation also. So, Pale Meal of Fáiltíh, the Mahaksho in Murtlahan Rua, Enaka Roin, Conde Tipperary. So, this is where I live, in Tipperary. And I am delighted that people have turned in tonight for the launch of this book. I suppose because I'm from Tipperary, we say we're the home of hurling. And I might begin to sing a song like Slieve the Mon to remind people of that, but I know that would lower the tone of what we're at here tonight. And certainly that was captured by my nieces in Fandango, and particularly captured by Lorna and John. They devoted energy and insight into the various aspects of the book that are going to change in many ways modern life, and I'm very, very grateful to them. I'm also very grateful to former President Mary McAleese and Professor Katrina Russell of Trinity College, and Professor John Sweeney and Pat Cox, they endorsed this book, which was very good 2 years ago when I sent copies of the book to them, and I'm very grateful to them. Again, they offer different insights into how these technologies are going to affect people today in such an extraordinary way, and I thank them. I thank my nieces, Orla and Alva, for the wonderful music which they provided here tonight. They began with Fandango, a little bit of the computer reality to it. They played delightfully and, of course, very superbly, but also, of course, Alva wrote this music, Fandango, and we will end with Skelly at the end of this presentation. Now, I would like to thank also the people from Messenger Publication, yourself, Celia, Carol Ann, Dawn O'Leary, Kate, for the publication and marketing of this book. And you helped me very much in the last two sections to weave it better into the whole reality of the book. You also took on board my suggestion that we get someone like Caroline Lillington to write a foreword for it. And I thought that was very interesting because she is one of the few people who has been writing on these technologies in the Irish Times for the last 3 or 4 years. And then she herself, you can see from the foreword, she began to realize about 2 years ago that surely there is a scientific dimension to all of this, but there also is a very serious ethical connection. And certainly that has enriched her own understanding. And I'm very grateful to her for taking that time to write that the foreword. And I think it actually adds to the value of my book. I would also like to thank my co-workers in St. Columban's, Dalgan Park, particularly the Columban Ecological Institute. My two companions there, Elizabeth McCardle and Pauline Connolly, we have worked together for the last almost 10 years. And something happened to me in 2014. I came on a list of works by the Oxford scholars, Carl Bernstein-Frey and Michael Osborne, who had begun to look at the impact of these technologies on human work. And they took about 702 different jobs in the United States. And they began to ask, how will technology change these in the next 20 years, particularly Moore's Law, which basically tells us that every 3 to 4 years, we double our capacity in digital technology. And so they basically came up with the insight about, in that article about 2013, that maybe 40% of people will not have jobs. Now, the point of the book is called Robust Ethics and the Future of Jobs. It's not the future of work. There is extraordinary work to be done. We have done enormous damage to our planet in climate change, in the destruction of biodiversity. I'm writing a series at the moment on the oceans. In my lifetime, I'm 77 years of age. I'm post World War II. We have destroyed the oceans. We've taken half the fish in the last 70 years. So there's an enormous amount of work to be done. So I actually look at this particular work for many years. I've written on those issues. Both Elizabeth and Pauline have critiqued it, offered many suggestions. So I actually look on this as almost a joint venture of the Columban Ecological Institute. I also mentioned John Fahey and Will Flanagan. Both of those, about 2 years ago, I gave a lot of material to both of these people that was going actually nowhere. Both of them brought a sense of insight to it and gave me really important to develop a book from that, and I thank them very much. Also, a very good friend of mine, Dermot Healy, a Columban friend of mine, known to us at Columbans as Derry. He's been most helpful to me in researching this book and in working for it, and I'm very grateful to him. You will see also my sister Maura read each draft of the book and meticulously looked at particularly the final draft. I saw a lot of red biro in the last few years as I was researching this. You'd say to me, "What's that paragraph doing there? I'm not too sure what it means. How does it link with something else?" Which I said earlier on. maybe some paragraphs should end up in the rubbish bin. So in many ways, particularly last year during the first of the lockdowns, we worked on this book, and maybe some nights I had red biro nightmares, seeing that there was so much red biro. But, and this is very important, what we needed to do was a book that is accessible to everyone. And both John and Lorna said that the book is accessible, and a lot of that is due to my sister, and I'm very, very grateful to her. This book reminds me of my first book, To Care for the Earth, A Call to a New Theology. When I began to write about what was happening to the environment 40 years ago, very few people were aware of that, particularly in the Catholic Church. Now, at least in the intervening years, and particularly with Laudato Si, particularly in climate change, at least the churches have got on side on this. Now, I'd like to see equal amount of time developed to what's happening to biodiversity, which is equally awful, and of course, often happens because of climate change. But at least people are beginning to take this seriously now. When I had finished, I began writing on these issues of care of the earth and a new theology. And I sent home, about 1983, I sent home a book that was actually To Care for the Earth. And I gave it to my sister and my brother-in-law, Eamon, and they circulated to 15 different publishers, and none of them would publish it. So that was it. I came home, I said, well, they didn't publish it when they were not interested. These were not questions that people were raising. But when I came home from the Philippines in 1985, Dr. Seán, who had taught me the Bible in Dalgan during my years there, he was now a professor of theology in Trinity College. So he asked me to give a talk. So I spoke again about the impact of the destruction of the environment on theology, and that we as Christians were not beginning to take that seriously. So afterwards, as often happens, we went over to a pub to continue the very deep discussion we were having on these issues. And Seán said to me, you know, e-missionaries are great. You have a lot of experience out there, and you obviously what you shared today was very important. Why don't you write on it? And I said, well, sorry, I have actually a text here that my sister and my brother-in-law sent to about 15 publishers in the last 2 years, but nobody would publish it. And I will never forget then Father McDonagh, who died just last week. He was there, and he said, I will introduce you to my publishers in Britain next week. And thank God he did. Enda died last week. I owe a great debt of gratitude to him. Labana imaslanev gorev akid. I feel with this new industrial revolution, we are facing a similar crisis to the ecological one I had kind of addressed in To Care for the Earth. I was also making the point that these extraordinary companies are very powerful. We saw what happened last week in Australia, who was a middle-income country, and both Facebook decided that they would unfriend Australia. Now here's an extraordinary company, as John said, 60% of revenue in that area goes to these companies today, and the impact on the print media and on the radio media is extraordinary. Now these people are monopolies, and monopolies, capitalism of our kind will not work if you allow monopolies to take over. In the 19th century, countries broke up monopolies, and that is actually what has to happen today. So as I was looking at these issues as part of the reality that has to change, you can see how much, for example, people are with hate speech. We're saying now, why are not these groups of people, Twitter and forced to take down almost everything they put up to? And I hope that's the kind of debate I want to see happen. There needs to be political action, and there needs to be decisive action that no 3 or 4 companies can direct totally the movement of our world into the future. So let me thank again Messenger for publishing this book. I'd also like to say a word from my own techie who was here earlier this evening to set up this for me. He's Michael Redden. He's a young person. He takes all of these new technologies very, very interestingly, but he's also very helped me to do what I needed to do tonight, to be here at this launch of the book. You will see the book is dedicated to Sister Patricia Green, whom I've known for many, many years. She is a woman of great compassion, of kindness and love, who has helped myself and many other people over the past number of decades. The people of Nina know this. Patricia is hugely admired also in St. Mirror and in her native place of Bansha in the parish of Doonbeg in County Clare. I want to thank you all for this, everyone who worked with me to bring this to fruition. I want to thank them hugely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seán. That was very inspiring for us all. We just have a few minutes if there are any questions. I see one question here. Seán, have you anything to say on how the government here might start to regulate what appears on social media? There certainly seems to have been a problem recently with the riots in Dublin last weekend, all of which apparently was set up on social media. How do we start to regulate that?
First of all, we need good laws, and then we need to insist that these laws are obeyed. And we need not be. In my first point, I make the point. Ireland is a difficult country for a lot of these companies because the place in Europe and actually in Africa is in Dublin. So we're delighted to have those jobs here, but we really must begin to insist that they do exactly what they say and clean up a lot of this nonsense on their sites, and particularly fake news. Fake news is exactly what's driving a lot of this nonsense today.
Thank you, Seán. I have another question here.
These companies won't like that. These companies, I mean, the reason why, for example, Facebook unfriended Australia was not because they were not willing to pay money. They were willing to pay all kinds of money. What they are not willing to be is regulated, as a lot of companies previously don't want to be regulated. But that's why you have a democracy. That's why you make laws. So everyone, not just the poor, but the rich as well, are held accountable.
Thank you, Seán. I have another question here from Katrina Russell, who says, can you tell us some more about what you see as the key aspects of the work ahead?
Well, I think the work ahead in this area will be people with different interests. I know Katrina was one of the people who endorsed the book. I think that religion has a lot to offer in this area, particularly in the area of ethics, because we're talking not just about ethics that affect humankind. We're actually talking about ethics which will affect the whole structure of human interaction with the environment into the future. And that's why I would like to see, for example, I'd love to see a Laudato Si kind of document brought out on these new technologies, giving you the various areas where you can begin to move on that. But now, if you're for example, involved in industry, first of all, you want to make sure that these companies pay taxes. I point out in the book that many of them pay very little taxes. Now, that's the way they organize themselves, but you shouldn't be allowed to do that. And I keep reminding you, in many of these situations, they are monopolies. And as monopolies, they should not be allowed to continue. So in all of these, like that's why I thought the introduction was very good, because here was someone like Caroline who had been working in this area and saw the importance of it, and to understand as well the science and the technology, but now seeing the extremely important dimension that ethics has in this, and that this must be married, because very often we don't marry this. And I make that point when I looked at the various industrial revolutions, from the first revolution, for example, in the 1850s. I mean, a lot of young people in Manchester in the 1820s and 30s went to work for companies for 10 or 12 or 13 or 14 years and then died. A lot were dead before they were 40, and it took many decades for the churches and other groups to cop on that these issues were disastrous, and that liberal economic policies were not able to deal with them in a way they should. And it was until the unions developed in the last century that people began to get decent work and decent conditions. I don't want to see that 3 or 4 decades happening again with something as powerful as these technologies. And if we don't do something about it, it will.
Thank you, Seán. I've one last question for you. This is from Declan Lennon, who's head teacher of a secondary school in St Albans in England. And Declan asks, what's the one piece of advice you would give parents, students, or teachers?
The one piece of advice is take these new technologies seriously. You know, I mean, they're very good. I start the book with an incident that when I went back to Lake Cebu I was going to call my mother once a month, and basically that took 6 hours or maybe more. I always went with 2 books, a novel and a serious book. The bus may break down. You sit down for half an hour, and now you got into Davao. It was the only city that had an external, an overseas telephone line, and you get 5 or 10 minutes, which is very expensive. The thing may break down in the middle of your conversation. I stayed with the Marinoras that night. I was back to Lake Cebu the following day. I was talking to people in Lake Cebu yesterday. So that's huge, and that's a great thing. And these are very valuable technologies. And I make that point right too. But they're also technologies that we need to watch what's happening. And as Democrats, we'll make a decision that society will decide where they will go, rather than the money which is driving them.
Could I make a quick recommendation?
Yes.
But Seán won't make it himself, and that's to read this book and to recommend it to your friends. And as I think it's a perfect book for a second level education.
Thank you.
More. So yeah, read the book.
Thank you, Lorna.
Yeah.
I think that's all we have time for now this evening. So thank you very much indeed to our speakers, John Sweeney and Lorna Gold. And thank you again to Seán for a very interesting evening. And thank you for publishing your book with Messenger Publications. I'd just like to say that the book is available at a special price for those who've attended the launch this evening. You will all receive a code from my colleague Carol Ann, which you can use on our website, and that will give you about €5 off the book. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming along this evening. I think you'll all agree it's been a really thought-provoking and fascinating evening. So to round off the evening and play us out, I'm delighted to present again the McDonagh sisters. If you've enjoyed their music, they do actually have 2 albums available, Skellig and It's a Cello Thing, and they're both on Spotify, or you can get them from Alva's website, alvamcdonagh.com. So to play us out, Alva's composition, Skellig.